My wife cheated with my best friend while I was at home injured. They even sent videos of it to me. I confronted her about it, and then I had a revenge affair. Eventually, we got divorced. 4 years ago, when I was 36, something terrible happened. My wife, Chrissy, who was 35 at the time, and I had been together for 15 years, married for 12. We were living comfortably in an upper middle class life with our 14-year-old daughter. We had two close friends from college, Eric, 34, and Mike, also 34. Eric was married to Emily, 30, and Mike had recently gone through a divorce. Chrissy and Emily had become close friends, and our group of three couples had been taking week-long vacations together for a few years. Everything was set for our summer vacation when I broke my ankle 3 days before the trip. I decided not to go because I couldn't walk, was on strong medication, and didn't want to spoil everyone's fun. Chrissy offered to stay with me, but I insisted she go on the trip without me, so the trip ended up being just Chrissy, Eric, Emily, and Mike. The day everything went wrong was December 7th, 2019. Chrissy and Emily had planned a girls' shopping weekend with a hotel stay. That night, I noticed on Snapchat's map feature that Mike was in the same location as Chrissy. My mind immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion, and I bombarded Chrissy's phone with calls and texts. However, my attempts to reach Chrissy were met with silence. Knowing Emily should be with them, I called Eric to find out her whereabouts. I shared what I had seen and expressed my intention to drive over and confront them. In a somber tone, Eric confirmed that Emily had indeed gone on the trip with Chrissy, and that he knew Mike would be there too. Initially, I felt a sense of relief, thinking it might be just an affair between Mike and Emily, with Chrissy unaware. But then Eric dropped a bombshell. It wasn't the first time Emily had been with Mike, and Eric himself had been involved too. My shock turned into a white-hot rage. I unleashed my fury on Eric before abruptly ending the call. I completely lost control, smashing things around the house and yelling curses. My daughter, visibly scared and worried, witnessed this side of me for the first time. Despite my own turmoil, I managed to compose myself when she appeared, assuring her that everything was fine and blaming my outburst on work stress. I retreated to my room, where I called Eric again, demanding he tell me everything. He agreed, starting from the vacation they took in July, detailing how things escalated over the days, particularly on the second day when alcohol fueled their actions. As Chrissy and Mike grew increasingly flirtatious and close, Eric and Emily eventually retreated to their own room, leaving them alone. After some time, Emily became curious about what was happening and quietly checked on them. She found Chrissy's room empty and heard unmistakable sounds coming from Mike's room, indicating intimacy between two intoxicated individuals trying to keep quiet. Emily returned to Eric and relayed what she had discovered. At this point, I interrupted Eric, questioning why Emily hadn't intervened earlier, especially since she had noticed Chrissy and Mike's escalating behavior during dinner. Eric then revealed the underlying issues in their own marriage, including bedroom problems and Emily's request for an open relationship for the past 6 months. Eventually, Eric reluctantly agreed, proposing swinging as a trial. Originally, they had planned to discuss swinging with Chrissy and me during the trip, but my injury rendered that plan obsolete. Emily saw Chrissy's indiscretion with Mike as an opportunity to revisit the idea of swinging. The following morning, Emily confronted Chrissy about the incident. Chrissy expressed guilt and extreme worry about being caught, especially with witnesses present. She admitted it was a mistake but also confessed to enjoying the encounter, particularly in her intoxicated state. Emily encouraged her to continue, citing Mike's recent divorce and my prolonged stress from work as reasons to explore this lifestyle further. Here we are on vacation and you've left everything behind, your job, me, Chuck, and Cora, our daughter. Consider it a carefree week. Eric and I won't breathe a word, and we'll handle any issues that may arise. Eric told me that she seemed intrigued but also hesitant. She went to talk to Mike, who then approached Eric to confirm if we were serious about letting it happen. Eric assured him that we were, having been coached by Emily on what to say. They both deserved a break from reality, and once we returned, everything would go back to normal, with Chuck none the wiser. Hearing this made me feel sick to my stomach. The betrayal from my wife and two closest friends hit me hard. Despite feeling a whirlwind of anger and hurt, I needed to understand the full extent of the situation. Over the next 3 days, they stuck to the vacation plans, and I knew this to be true. During those days, all the usual Instagram and Facebook updates went live. I kept receiving group snaps from everyone, and Chrissy would call me twice a day, with intermittent texts in between while I was at home recovering. I had no suspicion of what was really happening. As for the update, he told me that during those last 3 days of the vacation, Mike and Chrissy behaved like the couple in the honeymoon phase. They made sure any public photos or posts appeared innocent, but they didn't hold back on displaying affection, often holding hands and kissing openly. Whenever they returned to the Airbnb, then, they headed straight to Mike's bed, their actions leaving little to the imagination. By the fourth night, they didn't even bother to close the door. On the fifth day, Emily put her plan into action. Eric wasn't privy to the details of their conversation, but Emily managed to convince Chrissy to agree to the swap. Mike mentioned something to Eric, who reluctantly went along with it, despite not really wanting it. Having succumbed to Emily's persistent pressure by then, he recounted being with Chrissy during that time, acknowledging they engaged in intimacy among other activities. However, his focus was divided, knowing Emily was with Mike nearby. While Chrissy put on a convincing performance, he sensed her dissatisfaction. What truly wounded his pride was Chrissy returning to her room while Emily spent the entire night with Mike. The next morning, he overheard Chrissy telling Emily, "You owe me one," as they prepared to leave. They all silently agreed to keep the events secret forever. When Chrissy returned home, she immediately tended to him, showering him with affection. In hindsight, he realized it was a tactic known as love bombing by betrayed spouses. This continued for weeks, and although he initially attributed it to guilt over his injury and refreshed from the vacation, it was likely guilt from her infidelity. Eric explained that upon returning, Emily was adamant about pursuing an open relationship. Despite his initial reluctance, Eric eventually agreed to establish ground rules, with complete transparency being paramount. When asked why he agreed to such conditions, given his aversion to the idea of her being with other men, he revealed that Emily's first rule was no limits, prompting him to request access to all communications to keep track of potential partners. She insisted that there should be no limits, emphasizing the need for complete openness in their relationship. According to her, true intimacy couldn't exist if certain people were off limits. This principle applied to both of them, meaning he should be okay with her being with other men, including her sisters, exes, or co-workers. He reluctantly agreed on the condition that he had access to all communication, which he planned to use as evidence in their eventual divorce. Initially resistant, she eventually relented, fearing exposure of their vacation indiscretions. He mentioned having access to their messages, most of which revealed his wife's involvement with other men, including co-workers and strangers. However, amidst the flurry of conversations, he noticed frequent exchanges between Chrissy and Emily. It became apparent that Emily and Mike had been having an ongoing affair for about 4 months prior, with discussions about a threesome emerging roughly a month earlier. Despite Chrissy's initial insistence that the vacation was a one-time event, she gradually warmed up to the idea, spurred on by Emily's encouragement and Mike's eventual involvement. Eric also possessed incriminating evidence, a photo of Chrissy and Mike kissing and a recording of their intimate encounter, which he had surreptitiously obtained. The video wasn't the highest quality, but it captured her face and tattoo clearly. I thanked him for the evidence before unleashing a torrent of anger, telling him he was a despicable person and insisting that once our divorces were finalized, he should never dare to contact me again. Regarding the update, Chrissy remained silent from my initial frantic call until she finally arrived home at 7:00 p.m. on Sunday night. She appeared visibly nervous and scared, already aware that I had uncovered everything. Eric had left Emily a voicemail informing her that he had provided me with all the evidence and details, and that he wouldn't be there when she returned home. He instructed her to sign the divorce papers on the kitchen table. I instructed Chrissy to gather herself while Cora came out briefly, and for a few hours we pretended to have a normal Sunday evening. Once she retired to bed, I confronted Chrissy about her intentions. She broke down in tears, attempting to embrace me, but I rebuffed her advances. She begged for forgiveness, apologizing profusely, but I cut her off, demanding complete honesty. I warned her that if I caught her lying, our conversation would end and I would proceed with divorce proceedings on Monday. With ample evidence against her, there would be no way for her to escape accountability, especially in a state where fault matters. I then reminded her that she hadn't answered my initial question. I pressed her to clarify her desires. She expressed a strong desire to demonstrate her remorse, work towards forgiveness, and rebuild our relationship. Although skeptical, I allowed her to explain herself further. When asked why she cheated initially, she admitted to feeling carefree and relaxed on that particular day, a stark contrast to the stress she endured at work for an extended period. She confessed to succumbing to the allure of the moment and alcohol, acknowledging that she felt terrible afterward. However, my patience wore thin as she struggled to justify her subsequent actions. She admitted to a combination of factors influencing her decisions, including Emily's influence and her own rationalizations, fueled by a previous instance of infidelity. Her account of the explicit details was difficult to bear, as it painted a picture of reckless abandon, a departure from our usual dynamic. Despite her reassurances that our marriage was solid, she confessed to a yearning for excitement and spontaneity. lamenting the monotony that had crept into our relationship over time. Initially, she had intended to share such intimate experiences with me, but when I was unable to accompany her on the trip, she seized the opportunity presented by Mike. I inquired about the swapping aspect of the situation. Chrissy admitted it was a significant error, influenced by conversations with Emily. Initially, when the idea of a threesome arose, Chrissy attempted to resist, but over time, she found herself increasingly drawn to the idea. She confessed that she ultimately gave in because of Mike's persuasive charm and her curiosity about the experience. She admitted to thinking she could get away with it, especially as it was her first time engaging in such activities. When I questioned why she didn't immediately return home upon realizing I had discovered her indiscretions, she argued that the outcome would have been the same whether she stayed or left. She believed the damage was already done, and there was little difference between prolonging the encounter and leaving abruptly. When I asked if there was anything else she wanted to disclose, she insisted there was not, expressing her desire for a chance to rebuild trust, seek forgiveness, and mend our relationship. However, I rejected her plea, overwhelmed by feelings of hurt and betrayal. Unable to bear the sight of her any longer, I resolved to file for divorce the following day, bringing our tumultuous chapter to an end. In the third update, I woke to find Chrissy still at home, an unusual occurrence as she typically left for the office by then. It seemed she had taken the day off, likely anticipating the need to address our situation. After our daughter Cor had gone to school, Chrissy began her attempts at love bombing, but I rebuffed her efforts, expressing my indifference to her gestures. She then presented me with one final proposal: complete access to her life, including all her communications, marriage counseling, and cutting ties with Emily permanently. She promised full transparency and openness to any questions I had. However, I dismissed these suggestions as mere prerequisites for reconciliation, something I had no interest in pursuing. Despite Chrissy's pleading and bargaining, I agreed only to a one-week trial period. Throughout the week, she continued her love-bombing tactics, even attempting to initiate intimacy, but I remained unmoved. By Thursday, I made it clear that my feelings hadn't changed, and I still intended to file for divorce on Monday. On Friday evening, Chrissy seemed to have something on her mind, but by then I was merely counting down the hours until I could be free of her. Her persistent love bombing had become more of an annoyance than anything else. When she suggested the idea of a threesome, I was taken aback at first, but she confirmed my suspicions. She then proposed giving me a week off from marriage, which I deemed worthless given the disparity in our ability to find new partners. As a woman, she could easily find someone, whereas I, as a man, would struggle without being rich or famous. Sitting in bars or swiping on dating apps would be futile for me. She agreed to my proposal, offering me 10 hall passes with no expiration date, which I found surprising. I questioned whether this arrangement would affect our intimacy, but she assured me that she would prioritize meeting my needs and fulfilling any desires I had. She promised to make a concerted effort to ensure our sex life didn't suffer and offered to explore any fantasies I had harbored. Initially, I hesitated, feeling conflicted about accepting her offer. Looking back, I acknowledged that my next move was somewhat underhanded. Instead of walking away and starting afresh, I saw an opportunity for revenge and decided to seize it. I reasoned that since she had wronged me, cashing in on her offers was justified retaliation. With this in mind, I agreed to the arrangement, knowing that I still intended to proceed with the divorce once it was all said and done. However, I insisted that the threesome happen soon, setting a deadline of February 1st for her to find a willing participant. If she failed to do so, it would signify to me that she wasn't genuinely trying to make amends and was merely trying to buy herself time. To my surprise, she managed to find a girl from her spin class within the week between Christmas and New Year. The girl Chrissy found, Tiffany, was stunning, and I was amazed she had found someone so quickly and attractive. Tiffany, a 25-year-old, had apparently been chatting with Chrissy at spin class for a while, although their conversations had never gone beyond small talk. When I asked how Chrissy had managed to arrange the encounter, she simply said she had her methods. My assumption was that she might have offered Tiffany some financial incentive. About 2 weeks later, the anticipated evening arrived. Despite my initial feelings of spite, I made a conscious effort not to act selfishly, drawing from my years of browsing Reddit, where I had come across numerous stories and advice threads about threesomes, particularly concerning the potential for one partner, often the woman in a FMN scenario, to feel neglected. I made sure to include Chrissy in the experience. Throughout the encounter, I ensured that both Tiffany and I paid attention to my wife, engaging her in conversation and offering compliments. While I did enjoy myself with Tiffany, I knew that prioritizing Chrissy's involvement would give her the impression that our relationship was progressing positively, and indeed, my approach proved successful. Chrissy expressed how the threesome had initially been an attempt to win me back, but she found the experience incredible, feeling a renewed connection between us. Prior to this, she had felt obligated to be affectionate towards me, but after the threesome, her enthusiasm for our relationship seemed genuine. Although part of her excitement might have stemmed from the hope that I would forgo the hall passes, she genuinely seemed eager to explore new aspects of our relationship. In mid-February, I decided to use one of the hall passes for the first time, meeting up with Sabrina, a 27-year-old restaurant manager who worked close to my office. I had been a regular at the restaurant where Sabrina worked, and I often sensed a hint of flirtation from her. Taking a chance, I asked her out, fabricating a story about being 2 months into divorce proceedings and claiming that although my ex-wife and I were still living together, I had moved into the basement. Sabrina seemed hesitant initially but eventually agreed to the date. Later, I questioned her about her decision considering the circumstances. She explained that she had noticed I wasn't wearing my wedding ring the first time I visited without it. By the time I asked her out, the tan line from my ring finger had started to fade, indicating that I wasn't simply removing it to meet other women, but had stopped wearing it altogether. As the COVID-19 shutdowns began to impact daily life, I found myself in a state of limbo, using it as an excuse to postpone marriage counseling, which Chrissy had been pushing for. I had promised to consider it only after the threesome and later after going on a date. With the shutdowns, I found myself spending more time with Sabrina, meeting up 7 times by April, including 2 formal dates that deeply affected Chrissy before the shutdowns began. Once the shutdown started, I started visiting Sabrina's apartment more frequently as she lived alone. It was around this time that our relationship turned physical. Tired of pretending to reconcile and feeling that I had already caused enough pain to Chrissy, I decided to end the charade and pursue a divorce. When I broke the news to Chrissy, she didn't put up a fight. Instead, she seemed resigned and defeated. I found a small 2-bedroom house and moved out, leaving Chrissy in our family home, a decision that felt like the least I could do in the circumstances. The only thing I made sure to do amidst all of this was to sit Cora down and tell her the unfiltered truth. I didn't hold back, recounting the entire story from her mom's infidelity to my own regrettable behavior afterward. I wanted her to understand that both her parents had made mistakes, despite our love for her being unwavering. Together, we decided that a 50-50 custody arrangement was best, alternating weeks between each other's homes. It wasn't until January of 2021 that the divorce was finalized. Throughout that time, I was in a relationship with Sabrina, and thankfully, Cora and her got along well. Cora never saw Sabrina as a threat or an interloper. Their dynamic was more like that of a child with her parents' friends. My relationship with Sabrina lasted until January of this year, but it ended because I realized I didn't want to remarry or have more children. Chrissy had some sporadic dating experiences over the years. We've managed to co-parent effectively throughout it all, always prioritizing Cora's well-being. Then came Cora's high school graduation this past May, where something unexpected happened. We found ourselves sitting together, and what should have been awkward just wasn't. We started joking around, chatting, and even got a bit flirty. It felt refreshing. A week later, still thinking about the fun we had, I decided to call Chrissy and ask her out. Her immediate response was a resolute no, which left me feeling embarrassed. But after a moment of silence, she added a condition: marriage counseling. I agreed, and we started our journey with our first session followed by our first date. 6 months have passed and we're still in counseling. We chose a counselor specializing in unconventional relationships as it's something we both want to explore. Discussions have even turned to the possibility of me moving back into our original family home. Cora finds the idea of us reconciling a bit weird, but she's supportive nonetheless. As for Eric, he divorced Emily and made a quick exit, transferring to a different state for work. Mike and Emily attempted to make their relationship work but soon realized they had little in common beyond physical intimacy. Emily eventually remarried someone Eric used to work with, adding a humorous twist to the situation. So that's my story. Perhaps one day it will have a happy ending, but for now, only time will tell. Oh, and as a postscript, Chrissy paid Tiffany $250 for her involvement in the trio. Happy holidays.